Who says you need to be a pro painter to get good results in the 20 blinks of an eye? Paint snobs is who, and I say nay to every one of the nutchuckers. My name is Benji, and this is Marvel Crisis Protocol's Red Skull Speed Painting Guide for the casual painter. So, as it will become abundantly clear, I am not a pro painter, but one thing I do know is that the learning curve to make a miniature look good on the tabletop is not as steep as you might think, and that's what these videos are here for, to help you find the right balance between speed and quality. At the core of this guide and what we'll be using is the Citadel Contrast Paint range, which more or less allows you to get the same effect as applying a base coat and a wash all in one go. But because you might have already or prefer a different range of paints, we'll pop the names of the closest equivalents up on screen as we go. But before we go onward bound, please do take a moment to subscribe to the channel to keep yourself in the bubble of awesome, and smash that like button to help a channel out. First things first then, you need to prime your model. We're opting to use the complimentary Wraithbone spray as it gives a more natural and organic look when the contrast is applied. Of course, if you plan to use a different type of primer, make sure it's a white or off-white because these paints just ain't gonna work on darker tones. Also, I try and embrace my mistakes, and here before I'd even got started in earnest I'd made a doozy. There was some clear pooling of dried primer in the right back shoulder of the model, and it actually took me far longer than it should to realise it shouldn't have been there. We fixed it by the end, but no matter how hasty you're trying to be, always be methodical and thorough throughout this process. So with detour aside, we get some paint on the model, here with some ultramarines blue on the straps of the cloak. Most artwork depicting the Crimson Noggin seems to have blue tinge, so this base coat, if you want to call it, will still show through the next contrast layer we apply. It'll just further dampen the contrast of what you see. Remember, you should always be moving the model so as to point in up and down strokes, as opposed to moving your brush strokes around like all points of a compass. Channel your inner Daniel, son, and up, down, paint the fence. Booyah! Didn't take us long then to get some Blood Angels red on both hands, the skull and the arm patch. Arm patches, Benji, there are two of them, you pleb. Okay, yet another thing it took my brain a little longer to engage with. It's like that whole part of the model was in my blind spot. Anyways, watch for pooling on the head because there is literally nowhere to hide for that shiny dome. The Tesseract was next in our sights with a coat of Aethematic blue. Now it's fair to say that contrast paints aren't best suited on flat surfaces, but because the object here is so small, it worked out just fine. The edges were completely bereft of paint, which, because we want them lighter anyway, meant that the stars aligned for the best. But we also opted to be consciously untidy, painting the parts that abutted the hands, and made sure a thin line of the blue eked over onto the flesh to faux convey the projection of light and shadow from the glowing cube. Out came the Black Templar next over more or less the whole model. Anything clothes-wise got a hug and a kiss from our black contrast paint of choice, but with this many tight crevices and creases, we had to be very careful to apply as even a coat as possible, and we had to be very wary of pooling, because the whole outfit is actually quite intricate, which isn't obviously apparent at first. Which is to say, you should spend as much time making sure everything's just so when the paint's on than you did applying it in the first place. Having learned from the previous Crossbones guide, there were no time for shenanigans with the silver and gold parts of the model, so we went with the non-contrast lead belcher as the base colour for the belt clasps and a number of buttons mostly found on the straps. Just a little paint on the tip of the brush should do the trick. A little dab on the model, where less is more. Rinse and repeat, and you shouldn't overdo it. To achieve the contrast look of gold, we then applied a coat of Eandon yellow over the bulk of what we just lead belchered. Now, I'm not going to sit here and proclaim this is how I want my golds and bronzes to look, but we promise contrast, and so we deliver contrast. If you're not happy with the way this looks, then my go-to gold layer paints for this sort of thing would be Gehenna's Gold for a duller finish and Ulrich or Armour Gold if you like bright and shiny. You can probably get away with just the one layer on smaller areas like this, so that's definitely an alternative route worth considering. And that leaves us with just the holy concrete base getting Basilicanum grade. Don't be liberal here, but do beware, even on this flat surface you'll need to deal with pooling and uneven application. Honestly though, no matter how hard you wish it would be, you're not going to get a great finish around the edge of the base with this paint. But as you'll see by the end of the video, an even coat of Abaddon Black is a nice option to finish. And there you have the quickest, dirtiest, easiest way to get Red Skull tabletop ready. Yes, contrast paints do have limitations, but they're few and far between for what you get in return. And whilst that might be more than enough for what you need, we're going to continue our journey and add a few highlights and finishing touches to the model. Again, nothing too excessive in the spirit of this video, but for just a little extra time at the paint station, we can get some nice results. First of our encore steps was to apply a liberal highlight of Cantor Blue on the edge of the straps. The Black Templar did a good job of dialing that base coat of Ultramarines blue, so just so as to re-emphasise the blue tint, a nice thin layer should do the trick. We needed a bit more contrast than in the all black parts of the cloak, so a layer of Eshin Grey was added to all the raised areas, once again solely in the pursuit of adding a bit more contrast and depth to what is essentially the bulk of the model. The skull was up next, and whilst we had a few options to accentuate up from Blood Angel's Red, we ultimately opted for Wild Rider Red on all the flesh parts of the model. The very subtle orange tinge to the Wild Rider Red turned out quite well, but you could also use something like Evil Sun Scarlet to get a similar effect. A few touches to the Tesseract were necessary before we packed up, and so we very judiciously highlighted all the straight edges of the cube with Blue Horror, which isn't as difficult as you might imagine, as the right angles on each end provide a welcome path of least resistance. And then we did get a little bit nitpicky and edge highlight just the corners with some white scar as well, just to try and emphasise that glowing light effect. And that was that, just some final touches to the base where we dry brush some Administratum Grey over the lot. Now, it's not always the easiest thing dry brushing over flat surfaces, so be sure to err on the side of getting too much paint off the brush before dusting it on. This is also where we applied the most even coat of Abaddon Black we could muster around the very edge. And that, as they say, is that. I'm sure many of you will be happy with just the contrast paint steps, but it just goes to show what can be achieved with minimal time investment no matter how far along you ventured. Stay tuned for more speed painting guides for those that want less time painting, more time gaming. Alas, I have been the voice of Benji, and this video has ended.